This video is gonna be much faster than the one on Act 1, since levels get set high enough to where I can assume the availability of a lot of things, meaning there's no need to name alternatives. Again, I'm not going to mention any of the universally strong options. The Shotgun Whistle works on all bosses except Mordragon. On everyone else you either have a 100% chance, or if they're otherwise immune to sleep, a 75% chance of hitting. Both of those odds are worth going for. For the other staple abilities, a meta character guide. Further, having perfect Panaceas or Wake Robins on everyone is always gonna make things more reliable, so stocking up your inventory goes without saying. Against a lot of the bosses, different weapons, specifically greatswords, do the same damage when calculating in bonuses. The Knight Cleaver holds up for quite a bit, since everything takes 10% or so extra damage from it, and I won't mention any of those unless they're really relevant. A 10% damage bonus isn't gonna make or break your strategy, but I will again link the resistance data down below. Finally, I'm going to include the patterns, if existent and relevant, at the bottom of the screen, and with that out of the way we can get right into the bosses after Tyrian, since he already got his own video. I will only glance over web because damage values are mostly set, so Pearly Gates will do 55% of your max HP in non-elemental damage, and Quadra Slash is always gonna do the same amount. The clones aren't immune to non-Quadra Slash attacks, so killing them is fast, but it might even be worth waiting out the MP, since Web will attempt to summon them regardless of whether they live or not. A trend going forward is that Skull Wings to negate dark damage are incredibly useful. Tyrian was technically the first boss this applies to, but I wanted to mention it again. To even reach Web, you need to have beaten Tyrian, and for that your stats need to be high enough to where Web isn't gonna pose a problem. Avarith is the first real boss, and first of all there's no reason to not have Web at this point. You start this fight fizzled and you need to survive until it runs out, so consumables are really useful. Panaceas to heal and maybe Wake Robins are super important, but Sylvano does his job of waking you up pretty well. Then once Fizzle runs out, if you ever get off her bounce, she practically can't harm you and won't snooze you either. You only need to have bounce applied to one party member for the AI to think that defensive spells aren't worth going for. She also has high defense that she buffs up with Kabuff, so you can either zap or scrap metal her, or use attacks that ignore defense entirely. Before Fizzle wears off, it might be worth it to use one of Web's buff removal abilities. I recommend playing this fight defensively, and then after Fizzle wears off you can use bounce, then zap her and go to town with Unbridled Blade. This also happens to be the only fight where the Blaze of Glowy pep power shines, since it is the only way of increasing the Luminary's attack power. So if you didn't get Eric yet, go get him. He doesn't have abilities, but he can throw items, use sigils, cure sleep, which especially comes useful here and is generally good to have. Next up might be a bit of a gauntlet, but luckily you don't have to fight them all in a row. The Restless Knight is a bit of a glass cannon. His defense is low and he's slightly zap resistant, so it's totally viable to never reduce his defense. You do not have to heal that much, but eventually he'll reduce your max HP enough to start killing party members, so it's important to either finish him off before then, or simply have Yggdrasil Leaves on hand. Skull Wings not only negate damage from Nagagash, but they also make you immune to the curses. Cursed is one of the least worrying status effects, and I recommend only curing it when Web doesn't need to heal and potentially has already applied zap. Thanks to his magic shield, he is resistant to all non-light elements, which might not be important, but it's a fun detail. Playing aggressively is always important, but especially here it makes a world of a difference. And lastly, while you can apply almost all status effects to him, I don't recommend using anything besides Dirge of Dawnwhistle on him, since his resistances are high. But if your strategy isn't gonna be reliable either way, you can technically confuse him or put him to sleep. Against Gloomnivore, both his breath and Kazam get neutralized by wearing Skull Wings, so they are very effective here. Sleep attack is countered by perfect Panaceas, but at the end of the day, even if Dazzle and Blunt also have a good chance of hitting here, it's relatively easy to put him to sleep, so that should be the first priority, at least for Web. For everyone else, Sleeping Hibiscus is almost as good as Snooze, so spamming it with Eric makes him about as useful as any other party member. Honestly, just put him to sleep and remove the attack buff whenever he uses double up. As long as you heal, he can't really kill more than one party member per turn, and his HP pool is not that large. He's an easy one. While Jinxed Jade might resist all elemental damage and might have relatively okay defense, her HP is super low. The main difficulty comes from trying to keep your MP and HP as high as possible while possibly preserving pep powers for the next fight. It's for example viable to have Grab on the bench for this one to use Dirge of Dundrasil as soon as the next fight starts. It's also viable to use it against her since she's arguably more dangerous and the main goal should be to deplete her low HP pool as quickly as possible. You can dazzle her and it's a decent chance. I don't recommend any other status effects besides Zap and Blunt. The ones I mentioned all have the same chance to stick, so which one you use depends on the situation. For example, Blunt is better than Dazzle if you have armor. Eric may or may not outspeed her, so he's not a reliable failsafe to cure Sleep if it comes up. Sleep is not a huge issue though, since the chance is rather low. Besides Sobering Slap, you can only cure Enthrallment by physically attacking a party member. Before you attack, you can unequip your weapon, and while it's not guaranteed, it can be worth going for regardless. Also, she has very little MP, but it's not worth it because she is functionally the same afterwards. Booga is the first boss where pattern is relevant, might or might not be incredibly difficult based on what Draconian quest you're playing with. If you don't have the party vibes when Luminary perishes Draconian quest, you skip right to him after dying, with no need to fight Jade again. Personally, I've never struggled with him, but I believe people get stuck on him so often because they don't use consumables. MP drain isn't really a concern when you can restore it. The one action turn skip isn't really that bad unless all 4 party members start dancing, and if treated immediately you only lose 1 or 2 actions to cure Beguilement. If you can outdo the damage done by him in 2 or less actions, you're gonna win. That's how the action economy works, since you get 4 actions and he only gets 2. His damaging moves are pathetically weak and it's easy to out-heal them. But you do need to find a balance, because you want to win quickly, because then there are less chances for you to get screwed over by bad RNG. But most importantly, you don't want to embrace your inner monkey and just forget about somebody that's been beguiled. I do however not want to overstate the RNG aspect of this fight, since especially with equipment to reduce turn skip or beguilement chance, it's nowhere near as bad as Tyrion for example. As you can see from the pattern, he's limited to only using a status effect every 3rd action. Another small thing to keep in mind is that you can not have a weapon on Eric and Rap if they are not going to attack physically, since they are the most likely to get charmed. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can swap in or out party members on the action of a party member that's beguiled. To summarize, beyond the dance or beguilement, all his abilities are really weak, his attacks don't do much damage and MP drain can be circumvented easily. As long as you respect that one action where he either stuns or charms you and have some MP healing items on hand, you're gonna be fine. Alizarin's low agility and you having 6 party members available are the requirements to cheese him by abusing party vibes, even without armor. For more information, I have a video on how lineup switching breaks the game, and this boss is the first potential victim. Alizarin isn't a very hard boss, but he's fun since big numbers are nice to look at. That is because he has a crippling weakness to lightning, so Jade with one of the 2 spears that do lightning damage or the Gloomnivore with Kazap will absolutely melt him. The anti-dragon greatswords start coming into play for 4 out of the next 5 bosses, so I do think it's worth a quick mention. He is not as weak to sleep as the Gloomnivore, but his resistance is not high enough for it to not trivialize what little challenge he had left. Especially given how strong his zap hits, I recommend at least starting the fight with a sleep to set up attack paths on Jade and Hendrik while the Luminary spams Kazap. Furthermore, he has no resistance to Zap and Blunt. His HP pool seems high, but you melt through it quickly. Even before, but especially after the mist comes up and increases the damage you take by 50%, he can just kill a party member with a physical attack or fireball. But that's all the danger he provides. If you're stuck in a situation where you can't kill him quickly and the mist is set up, I especially recommend simply spamming sleep, since it will allow you to outlast the mist much more easily. He does sometimes use Decelerate, but his agility of 60 is low enough for him to not often outspeed you even after reducing your agility. Alizarin is one of the fastest and possibly the easiest boss if handled correctly. The only relevant part of Gyldygga's pattern is that after she turns 2 of your party members into gold, she will use Umflint Wake and Break, which can then be countered by, for example, Flashback. You can also get ready to remove her attack buff. Keep in mind that you can swap out party members on the action of a statue, so it's very easy to adjust and even benefit from being turned to gold. Despite the appearance suggesting otherwise, she doesn't resist poison at all, so Avarith can shine here. She can be paralyzed, but the chance is pretty low. Throwing Coagulant at her isn't a good option, but it will eventually work. Dazzle and Blunt have a very good chance of hitting, and since most of Gyldygga's attacks scale with her attack power, they work best. Most of her elemental resistances are high, but this only affects Jade's Crushed Ice in practice. The adds in this fight can be affected by all status effects, so I recommend doing just that. While Gyldygga isn't terribly frail, as long as you take care of the adds and remove her attack buff in some way, shape or form, she doesn't have a real way of snowballing out of control, and you will inevitably win. 70 agility is low enough for you to cheese the Auroral Serpent. Technically this guy has high damage, but there's a small problem. You can pick a status effect and it will work. Have a ball with nastier knives is almost guaranteed to confuse him, but you can apply anything. Avarith with knives works really well for that reason, especially with confusion or sleep, since they will likely last for more than 2 actions, so you can reapply it after Avarith's action. The serpent will stay confused or asleep, then you hit it, reapply and repeat until it's dead. If you really want to play without lineup shenanigans and without status effects, then you can still use Skull Wings to become immune to a lot of its attacks. You can even use Dazzle and it's most likely to stick, same with Blunt and Zap, they're actually guaranteed. This boss has the worst resistances to status ailments. He seemingly wants to get cheesed. There's barely any difference between the options, but Kisnu, Sleeping Hibiscus and Have a Ball work best from my experience. Tatsunaga attacks 3 times every turn on harder enemies and is the only boss in Act 2 that does so. He mostly uses single target attacks, meaning whoever is in front of your party is likely to get mauled, but we can use that to our advantage. Flashback or Night's Watch are incredibly busted here. Turn skip equipment is useful. Defense might seem useful because Tatsunaga mostly does physical attacks, but the desperate attacks you're really worried about ignore defense. There is an argument to be made for Alma Mater to prevent one-shots if you fully buffed someone up. Dazzle as well as Confusion and Sleep are all possible but very unlikely. Really, Flashback is the secret sauce. Greatsword Guard, Be Like Water, Dodgy Character, Immense Defense, Tap Dance and the list goes on, but especially Night's Watch help as well. 20 agility is definitely low enough for you to cheese Indignus. Surprisingly, he counts as a dragon. He mostly uses physical attacks, but Blunt is really effective and so is Buff if you have armor. Dazzle and Foot Sweep work against him at half odds too. He's also the first boss here to use Disruptive Waves, but he uses it at the very end of his cycle. If you reset to 2D mode, you can get duplicates of the Meteorite Bracer in the basement, and if you really want to, that allows you to technically cheese even Jasper, just as long as you're playing with armor. Needlessly to say, this will also go for Mordegon. Outside of that, Jasper's agility is so high that you will almost always go first and you have to play around that. He doesn't have a lot of HP, so I recommend playing super aggressively, at least without armor. Poison works well, so knives are effective. Jasper's Disruptive Wave is also very late, and combined with the low bulk, it makes it so that starting with Yggdragon's Blessing or Night's Watch is enough to end the fight. They're always strong, but they especially shine here. If Jasper gets to summon, the Ball Hips resist status effects and have a significant amount of HP, but the damage isn't terribly high, so not dealing with them has its time and place. With armor, this fight becomes much easier and I recommend slow playing with Kabuff. He also happens to be the last victim to Skull Wings. So now you have to fight 2 fights in a row, but after phase 1 you are fully healed, so phase 1 becomes about trying to keep peps when going into phase 2 if anything. For some reason Mordegon alternates between 2 and 1 actions. Phase 1 is also so slow that you can cheese it, but this won't reasonably let you retain more than 1 pet power. His early Disruptive Wave is very notable and needs to be played around, but after that he's not going to use a second one for quite a while. Lastly, Mordegon is cripplingly weak to light damage, so Night Cleavers make a return. He's incredibly easy to be honest and you are fully healed after him. All he ends up doing is wasting time and peps as you are attempting Mordragon. For this last fight I want to do something special. I want to commentate one of my fights with him and explain a few of my decisions to better illustrate my thought process. The first turn is just setting up and I'm trying to keep my HP about full at all times. I end up healing with the Luminary because there's no point in attacking immediately. Serena didn't have anything to do so I went for a blunt. The reason I used Jade here is because everybody else can use fire weapons for effective damage against the head. This just makes MP management simple. The fight is split into 3 phases. First the tail is by itself until it takes around 2000 damage. Then the head is by itself until it takes around 2000 damage. Those numbers are a bit higher if you're playing with harder enemies, and then you fight both at once. These phases are separated by disruptive waves. Poison will carry over between phases, but it is not likely to stick in the first place. I am unsure of how close the tail is to dying and nobody needs healing, so Sylvando just goes for a Cobra Strike and I used a couple of actions to buff up Eric. I could have buffed up more people since Disruptive Wave only affects your active lineup. I figured it was best to do now because the tail part is the easiest. The poison ends up activating the second phase, which results in this funny looking double disruptive wave. Jade could have used Revamp to increase her attack power now, which would have probably been optimal, but I forgot about MP healing items. I don't swap her out immediately because I still want to heal her, but that can be seen as a mistake. I also want to mention that Crushed Ice is a little bit stronger against the tail than Multi-Feed. It might be much weaker against the head, but against him you have everybody else with their fire weapons. I could have swapped out Hendrik to keep his buff, but at the same time he hadn't acted that turn yet, so he would have lost his action. In hindsight it would have been optimal to revive Serena and slow play it. The reason Eric isn't using swords but boomerangs here is because I was trying to gather footage. I start the third phase by trying to heal and revive everybody. Whenever I can't out-heal the damage that's being done to me, I swap out injured party members or dead ones. Technically you can remove the pep powers from him, so if Serena had Worm Whip now, I could have prevented the party wipe, but thanks to the power of Yggdrasil Leaves, getting my party wipe now doesn't matter too much. I wanted to show off that the sigil doesn't disappear if you swap somebody out and back in again, which is why I wasted Serena's action here. If you kill the head first, the tail will try to revive it with a large amount of HP, but either way they won't do a pep power for a bit. Usually the head is much easier to kill given how it's weak to fire. I go for it here and get lucky with Zing failing, but even if it hadn't failed, but you will get a bit of downtime to revive and heal up, even if it ends up getting the revive with the first Zing. As I stated before, I forgot about MP healing items, else Eric wouldn't be so useless now. The tail then goes on to even fail the second Zing. As long as it doesn't revive the head, it's basically harmless. The tail does get the third revive, but that only prolongs the fight a bit. I definitely didn't keep track of the HP here, so I thought they were much closer to death than they actually were. By now I'm beginning to realize that I should have probably just taken a shorter recording instead of speeding up the footage by 8 times. This does properly convey one thing, however, this fight is a test of endurance. He has 3 times the HP that Jasper had, for example. And that's not even including the amount of HP the first phase had. So now that the tail is down, I want to talk about one thing. People say Mordragon gets hyper aggressive when the tail dies, but does he really? I think by itself the head is pretty much harmless, but so is the tail, and the head dies more easily, so in this case I still think that killing the head first was the right decision. Had I had a better non-elemental option of attack, so for example Fatal Flash on Avarith, then killing the head first would have been the choice. I wanted to show whole fights for all of the bosses like I did in the Act 1 video, but as you can see, it would have taken way too long. And speeding up footage just isn't as easy to follow and especially isn't easy on the eyes. With this, I feel like I've compiled all my knowledge on this game in this video series, and it's only fitting that my favorite ability ends it all.